Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us here today in Washington, D.C. It is quite the humidity for those of us from the West, so we're appreciative of it. I want to welcome you to this public hearing hosted by the National Nuclear Security Administration. NNSA is the acronym that you might have heard, which is a semi-autonomous agency within the United States Department of Energy. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. I'm David Abelson, and I've been asked to moderate today's hearing. As background, I am an independent consultant who, among other things, provides facilitation services to federal, state, and local governments. And for context, and I think this is important, I've had no role in preparing the draft programmatic environmental impact statement for plutonium pit production that is the subject of today's hearing, and I do not otherwise work on pit production matters. My responsibility today is really threefold. It is to ensure the hearing is conducted respectfully, that each speaker receives the allotted time, and that comments are heard without interruption. Now, before the presentation begins, let me explain the purpose for today's hearing. In compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, that's another acronym, NEPA, you might have heard that, and the requirements of the settlement agreement, NNSA has prepared a draft PEIS for plutonium pit production at multiple sites. The notice of availability was published by the Environmental Protection Agency in the Federal Register on April 17th of 2026. In that notice, publication of that notice began the 90-day public comment period. The comment period closes at midnight on July 16th, 2026. An earlier public notice posted on April 10th, 2026 included an NNSA headquarters press release. Los Alamos National Laboratory published notice via a system called GovDelivery, and the Savannah River site published a notice via something called an environmental bulletin. The public comment portion of this hearing is being recorded for a transcript, and responses to comments and any revisions to the PEIS will be addressed in the final PEIS. So, here's today's agenda. Let me just quickly review it. The presentation portion of the hearing will last approximately 30 minutes. Nicole Nelson-John, who is the Principal Deputy Associate Administrator for NNSA's Office of Environment, Safety, and Health, will provide opening remarks about NNSA's pit production. Jade Fortner, who is from NNSA's Office of Plutonium Modernization, Washington, D.C., is the NNSA NEPA Documents Manager for the PEIS, and she will summarize the draft PEIS for you. Now, comments will begin after Jade's presentation, and the hearing today is scheduled to conclude at 5 p.m. It is 2:33. We have tons of time. Today's meeting I've been used to doing this at night, so I apologize between the day and night thing. Today's meeting is a public hearing, and its central purpose is for NNSA to summarize the draft PEIS and to hear your comments. And as a public hearing, there is no question and answer session. Now, in addition to Nicole Nelson-John and Jade Fortner, Kristen Doors, who's the NNSA NEPA Compliance Officer, is also here to hear your comments. And the three of them are sitting up front, so when you're up at the podium and you're speaking to them, you are giving comments to NNSA. Once Jade has concluded her presentation, I will then explain how to submit oral and written comments during the hearing and through the end of the comment period. Now, for her presentation, Jade will show a number of slides. You are more than welcome to take photographs of them. But also know they are available already on the DOE NEPA website, so if you want to just listen and not have to worry about taking photos of what she's presenting, you can go onto the NEPA website and you can download those at your availability. So let me pause there and let me bring up Nicole Nelson-John, who will give us some opening remarks.
Thank you, David. Hello, and thank you for joining us in DC for this hearing on the draft programmatic environmental impact statement for plutonium pit production. As David mentioned, I'm Nicole Nelson-John, Principal Deputy Associate Administrator for ES&H, or Environment, Safety, and Health, at NNSA headquarters, based here in Washington, DC. I'm particularly familiar with the pit production mission because I've been the manager at Savannah River site and at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and I started my career at Los Alamos National Laboratory. The pit production mission is proposed as a multi-site project to produce pits and modernize the nuclear stockpile. The proposal would utilize existing and enhance infrastructure and skill sets at Savannah River Site and at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Both sites have supported the nuclear weapons complex for decades and are critically important to the nation's defense. I am the federal official hosting this hearing, and Jade Fortner will present a summary of the information included in the PEIS. I want to thank you again for joining this hearing, and I encourage your participation and look forward to your comments. Now, I would like to turn it over to Jade Fortner. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jade Fortner, and I'm joined today by Kristen Doors. Kristen and others in NNSA provided guidance during the NEPA process and independently evaluated the document and coordinated its review with other federal officials. This interaction included DOE's Office of Environmental Management and other NNSA offices across the complex. Your input and comments on this draft PEIS will be considered by NNSA and allow us to improve the description and analysis of alternatives, as well as their potential impacts in the draft and final PEIS. On the next slide, I will explain what NEPA evaluations have previously addressed pit production, as well as why NNSA has prepared this programmatic EIS. Before I keep going, is the microphone okay for everyone? Okay, great. From 1952 to 1989, plutonium pits for the nuclear weapons stockpile were manufactured at the Rocky Flats plant in Golden, Colorado. Since that production mission ended, DOE's NNSA has evaluated the pit production mission multiple times over the last 30 years. The reviews have included both programmatic and site-specific reviews and decisions for Los Alamos National Laboratory and the Savannah River site. As shown on this slide, site-specific reviews were prepared for pit production at Lanel in 1999, 2008, 2020, and in the recently issued 2026 Lanel site-wide EIS, also called a SWICE. These reviews evaluated production of up to 80 pits per year at Lanel. A site-specific review of pit production at SRS was finalized in 2020. That EIS evaluated production of 50 to 125 pits per year at the Savannah River site. NNSA has conducted programmatic NEPA reviews that included pit production in 1996 and 2008. In 2019, NNSA prepared a supplement analysis on the 2008 PEIS, which evaluated the concurrent pit production at Lanel and the Savannah River site. In 2020, NNSA published amended programmatic records of decisions, or RODs, on the supplemental PEIS that decided to produce 30 pits per year at Lanel and 50 pits per year at the Savannah River site. They also published site-specific RODs for Lanel and SRS. After the publication of the 2020 RODs, plaintiffs litigated NNSA's decisions. The result of this litigation was a settlement agreement signed in early 2025 that precipitated the preparation of this PEIS document. The settlement agreement includes several stipulations that are relevant to the PEIS under development. These include a scoping period that lasts for at least 45 days after the scoping meetings are completed. The scoping meetings for the document were held online on May 27th and 28th of 2025, and the scoping period ended on July 14th, 2025. The comment period on this draft PEIS started on April 17th and is required to be 90 days. This 90-day period is twice the statutory minimum for comment period duration. The agreement also identified the specific hearing locations as listed on this slide. NNSA is holding hearings in each of these 5 locations during our comment period. The agreement also stipulates that the final PEIS and ROD must be published within 2.5 years, which for this will be July of 2027, and until then, there are certain activities not allowed at the Savannah River site. For instance, NNSA cannot introduce special nuclear material into the main process building of SRPPF, install classified equipment into SRPPF, or begin construction of the waste characterization laboratory. This graphic represents the current PEIS schedule milestones. We are currently in the 90-day review period for the draft PEIS. NNSA plans to publish the final PEIS and record of decision in early 2027 ahead of the July deadline. The main purpose of an EIS is to evaluate the potential impacts of a proposed action and its alternatives. The proposed action in this PEIS is to produce plutonium pits at the required quantities to meet national security requirements. These requirements can be found in 50 United States Code 2538A and currently state that NNSA should demonstrate the ability to produce 80 pits per year by 2030. The statute also specifically identifies the Savannah River site's SRPPF and Lanill's PF4 as locations for production. The alternatives include a no-action alternative, limiting production to Lanill, but allows for continued construction at the Savannah River site, multi-site production alternative, and a single-site production alternative that evaluates potential future decisions to limit pit production to only Lanill or SRS, but not both. Consideration of pit production at sites other than Lanill or SRS is not a reasonable alternative because it would be contrary to the current statute and could not be achieved within our congressionally mandated schedule. The PEIS presents potential impacts for an analytical period of 50 years. Lanill is one of 3 national security laboratories with responsibility for assessing the safety, security, and reliability of the U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile. The U.S. government has been operating at this site since 1943. The laboratory employs over 16,000 people, has an annual budget of over $4 billion, and occupies about 40 square miles. This graphic is an aerial photo of a portion of TA-55. The large building in the center is PF4, where a majority of pit production operations take place. The multi-story building in the upper right corner is the Radiological Laboratory Utility Office Building, also referred to as RULAB, which supports pit production activities. NNSA recently published the 2026 Lanill SWICE. All of the actions included in the no action alternative of the pit production PEIS related to Lanill were evaluated in the SWICE and included in the SWICE's record of decision. Pit production is only a subset of the activities evaluated in the Lanill SWICE. Some examples of pit production related activities that will be implemented at Lanill include the production of 30 pits per year with a surge capacity to 80, and construction of office buildings, security facilities, cafeterias, roads and parking, and additional transuranic waste staging areas. Construction of the Savannah River site was authorized in 1950 by President Truman. The site is an industrial complex responsible for supporting our nation's nuclear defense, preventing nuclear weapon proliferation, environmental stewardship and cleanup, waste management, and the disposition of nuclear material. Examples of NNSA's production missions at SRS include tritium operations and extraction, preparation for pit production, and surplus material disposition. SRS employs over 13,000 federal and contractor staff with an annual budget just under $4 billion. SRS is over 310 square miles and is mostly wooded. The graphic shown on the slide depicts the layout of the SRPPF complex in SRS's F area. one of the industrialized areas in the center of the site. F area is located over 6 miles from the western site boundary of the Savannah River. NNSA published the SRS pit production EIS and subsequent ROD in 2020. The ROD supports repurposing of the mixed oxide fuel fabrication facility into SRPPF and the construction of several support facilities in SRS's F area. As mentioned previously, the construction at SRS is ongoing and evaluated as part of the no action alternative in the PEIS, although operations of the facilities cannot begin until after a record of decision on this PEIS in accordance with the settlement agreement. This slide identifies the environmental resource areas analyzed in the PEIS. These resources were also addressed in the 2026 Lannel SWICE and the 2020 SRS pit production EIS. The current NEPA statute and DOE's NEPA implementing procedures include a page limit for EISs. The PEIS does comply with this page limit. Chapter 4 of the PEIS includes separate actions for each resource impact for Lannel and SRS. It also includes a section providing complex-wide impacts that could be additive for multi-site concurrent pit production. These impacts primarily focus on transportation and waste management. To define the no action alternative, NNSA has selected those actions that have been previously approved of and included in previous records of decision. At Lannel, this includes the upgrading of PF4, additional offices, cafeterias, security facilities, and training centers, true waste staging areas, and production of at least 30 pits per year with a surge capacity to 80 pits per year. The no action alternative at SRS includes the construction of the facilities described in the 2020 EIS. NNSA cannot bring nuclear material into SRPPF or construct specified support facilities until after a record of decision is published for this PEIS. Therefore, these activities have not been included in the no action alternative. Under the multi-site alternative, NNSA would produce pits concurrently at Lannel and SRS. At Lannel, pit production is assumed to range from 10 to 80 pits per year. At SRS, the PEIS evaluates production of 50 to 125 pits per year. At the maximum annual production rates analyzed, NNSA could produce a total from both sites of up to 205 pits per year. Analyzing a range of pit production capacities provides flexibility in the event that pit production requirements change. The PEIS analyzes a single site alternative in the event that multi-site pit production is no longer needed or desired in the future. For example, if funding constraints force NNSA to produce pits at a single site. A single site alternative at Lannel would be the same as the no action alternative. A single site alternative at SRS assumes the production of 50 to 125 pits per year only at SRS with minimum production at Lannel. With only pit production at Savannah River, NNSA would not produce pits for the stockpile at Lannel, but would maintain the existing Lannel pit production capability and standby. In this mode, Lannel would produce a minimal number of pits, for example 10 per year, to maintain production competency. Plutonium research and development, surveillance, testing, and other plutonium missions would continue at Lannel as they are independent of pit production activity. Last year, NNSA established specialized teams to evaluate aspects of the pit production process at SRS and Lannel to identify potential enhancements that could improve the overall pit production mission. As an outcome of these reviews and other NNSA considerations, there are opportunity for enhancements that NNSA is considering for future implementation at one or both sites. Descriptions of these enhancements are provided in section 2.7 of the PEIS. Each of the resource area impact sections in Chapter 4 include a discussion of how these enhancements could change the impacts of the proposed action, if at all. Some examples include increasing the plutonium inventory limit at Lannel's Rulab to allow for some activities currently performed at the Chemistry and Metallurgy Research Building to instead be performed in TA 55. Using commercially available mobile waste compactors at Lannel or SRS to size reduce true waste before sending it to WIP, and using the glove boxes and facilities in SRS's K area initially planned for surplus plutonium disposition to supplement capabilities at SRPPF for preparing purified plutonium. These next two slides provide a broad overview of potential impacts and a comparison between sites. A tabular comparison of each alternative by site and resource area can be found in section 2.9 of volume 1 and in the summary document. The permanent land development dedicated to pit production at Lannel and SRS is similar in that both sites require about 70 acres of facilities and infrastructure. The air pollutant emissions would be the same for both sites and well below the de minimis standards. The potential radiological air emissions would be very small for both sites and would contribute much less than 1% of the current radiological releases at Lannel and SRS. From a workforce standpoint, construction activities at SRS would be higher in the short term than at Lannel. However, both sites would potentially add over 2,000 operational workers. Radiological transportation of nuclear materials and waste would use the nation's highways. Even at the highest production rates, transportation impacts on crews and the public along transportation routes would be relatively small. For instance, incident-free transportation would add less than 1% of additional annual risk of a latent cancer fatality in the public population. The additional accident risk, taking into account the probability of a severe accident, would statistically represent about 1 fatality every 33,000 years. For comparison, there would be about 0.06 potential traffic fatalities per year from non-radiological accidents, roughly 1 every 17 years. This slide presents the estimates for radiological waste volumes generated for the range of production capacities. Most low-level waste from Lannel would be disposed of at the Nevada National Security Site. Most low-level waste from SRS would be disposed of on-site in SRS's E area. Adequate capacity exists at both of these locations. Most mixed waste would be disposed of at a licensed commercial disposal facility. There is adequate capacity for this waste. True waste is disposed of only at the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico. WIP is permitted under the WIP Land Withdrawal Act with volumetric and radioactivity limits. DOE's Office of Environmental Management operates WIP and reports annually on the amount of true waste projected to be disposed of. For operations meeting the current pit production statute of 80 pits per year, the amount of true waste generated could be disposed of within the current volume limit. Ultimately, as pit production proceeds, whether at single or multiple production sites, NNSA and DOE's Office of Environmental Management would monitor annual projections for future true waste generation related to pit production and complex-wide. DOE's NNSA would take proactive measures to stay within the existing limits established at WIP. An example of these measures could include waste compaction, and if, in the future, DOE determined that further regulatory actions for true waste disposal would be required, additional NEPA review would be performed. For human health impacts from normal operations, the PEIS demonstrates that doses to the offsite public would be a very small increase to the current annual reported exposure to the maximally exposed individual, or MEI, on this slide, and the collective population within 50 miles. The addition would be less than 1%. The PEIS presents potential accidents that could occur at both sites and the potential increase in accident risk. Accident risks to the population at both sites are very small, and the higher risk values from SRS would be within a population of over 1 million people within 50 miles of the site. The PEIS also discusses potential intentional destructive acts. Section 4.3 of the PEIS presents the potential for impacts from operations at one site to be additive or combined with impacts of operation at the other if operating concurrently. In most cases, these impacts would not be additive. For example, noise impacts at Lanel would not add to the potential noise impacts at the Savannah River site. However, because transportation of radiological materials and waste would use the nation's highways, and some may be received at the same locations along the same roads, these impacts may be additive. Additionally, because these wastes may be disposed of at the same locations, the impacts related to waste disposal capacity may also be additive. The PEIS addresses these potential impacts. This concludes my presentation about the draft PEIS, and I will now turn control of the hearing back to David. I want to thank you all for coming, participating in your government, and your participation. Have a great day.
So thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Jade. So that concludes the presentation portion for today's hearing, and now we're going to move into the public comment session. The NNSA officials, who I said are here in the front row, are here to listen. Comments can be submitted several ways. First of all, you can make comments from the podium today. There's also in the back of the room, there's a sign up, there's a sheet there where you can write your public comments and submit it now. And then also you can have written comments submitted later by email. And if you look up on the screen here, you'll see the email. It's PEIS@nnsa.doe.gov. And you can also do written comments via the US mail, and the address is up there as well. And all of this information is found on the DOE NEPA website. Now, comments must be postmarked or submitted by midnight on July 16th, 2026, in order to be considered in preparation for the final PEIS. I've been told, and it says this online, late comments will be considered, quote, to the extent practicable. Now, all comments, whether they are oral or whether they are written, will receive equal consideration. Please be advised, though, that your entire comment, including any personally identifiable information, may be publicly available. So what's that? Name, address, etc. So if you would like NNSA to withhold your name or other identifying information, please state that request at the beginning of your comments. Anonymous comments may also be submitted. Now, for those who attended what we call the open house here in the back of the room, the poster session, any conversations you had during that open house were not recorded and are not part of the formal record. So if you want those views to be considered, please restate them today or make them part of your written comments. So let me explain the oral comment process. You have to sign up at the registration table, and then I get the list. And right now there are 5 people on the list. Oral comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. The comments are individual comments. Time may not be transferred and time may not be shared. Now we recognize 3 minutes is brief. So a couple of things. Detailed comments should also be submitted in writing so that the full record reflects your views. Now we know we'll have time after the first round of speakers, so we will go on to a second round of speakers. And I'll explain that process when we get there. So as you think about your comments, if it's gonna go over 3 minutes, realize you'll unless we get a couple of buses pull up right now, we're good. Exactly. So, when you come up to speak, we're gonna have time cards here that Joe will hold up. And he'll have one that says 30 seconds, that'll be that sort of bright pink, and then he'll have one that is your time is up, which is just red. And you know, when you see the red, please wrap up your remarks. I'll ask you to conclude, and we'll move to the next speakers. I'm gonna go in the order in which people signed up, and we will If we do get that busload of people, we're gonna be here until 5 p.m. taking comments. I will call on a couple of people at a time so that you know your turn is coming. And when you come to the podium, please begin by stating and spelling your name and the name of any organization that you officially represent. Once you've provided that information, then your 3 minutes will start. NNSA asks that the comments address the analysis contained in the draft PEIS. Now, we know that many attendees have strong views about pit production and nuclear weapons in general. And the hearing exists in order to provide your comments to NNSA regarding the draft PEIS. My job is to manage the hearing to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to comment in an orderly and in a respectful manner. So essentially my job is our collective job, right? That's what we're trying to do, make sure people can comment in an orderly and in a respectful manner. So we're gonna start the public comment session here. As Nicole mentioned, she is the federal official hosting today's hearing. Before I call on the first names, are there any questions about the process we're using today? Anything about the comments process that we're using? Okay, easy crowd. So, okay, first is Daryl Kimball, and then Malka Binakheim. So please come up to this podium here.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daryl Kimball. I'm Executive Director of the Arms Control Association. As we speak, delegations from around the world are gathered in New York to review the implementation of and compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968, the NPT. None of the 5 nuclear armed states, including the United States, are complying with their obligations under Article 6 of that treaty to pursue good faith negotiations towards ending the arms race. There are no legally binding limits on US and Russian arsenals for the first time in decades. There are no ongoing arms control or disarmament negotiations. And the United States and other nuclear armed states are expanding and upgrading their nuclear weapons and warhead production capabilities. This is relevant because the plans for expanding US warhead production as outlined in this PEIS are a costly and unhelpful contributing factor in this dangerous equation of NPT non-compliance, the impact of which is not at all considered in the PEIS. So we've carefully reviewed the draft PEIS itself, and we remain dissatisfied with the document in several areas. I want to focus on 2, and I'll get to the first and maybe the second in the second round. Number 1, data on pit aging does not justify the DOE's preferred action alternative. So as the report says, a primary motive for new pit production is pit aging, or concerns about whether the existing pits will be effective as time progresses. The laboratories, nuclear weapons laboratories, have not, however, provided evidence that the nation's existing pit stockpile is near the end of its serviceable life. Starting in 1997, the NSA began to study pit aging. The Jason Group, an independent scientific advisory group, reviewed these studies in 2006. In 2006 and in 2012, a review by Jason and a review by the Lawrence Livermore National Labs confirmed that primary types of pits could have effective lifetime spans of over 100 years. In 2019, Jason again evaluated pit aging, recommended expanding pit production capabilities, but did not find, quote, impending issues for the stockpile, and expressed concern about the lack of updated studies and research underlying recommendations. So those studies are now underway, but the PEIS does not provide adequate justification for ramping up pit production at 2 sites to 80 pits per year on the basis of these studies, and the newer studies are not yet completed. I'll stop there. I don't know what the time is.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
I have 30 seconds. I will stop and I will pick up in the second round with the other comments. Thanks.
And Malka, and if people can spell their names too, and it's Daryl Kimball for Daryl Kimball.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Malka Binakheim, M-A-L-K-A-H, second word B-I-N-A-H, and last name is K-L-E-I-N. Hi, thank you for having us. I stand here as a child of Los Alamos. I grew up in Los Alamos in the 1970s and the 1980s and had summer jobs at the lab in the early 90s. And I was nurtured to carry on the legacy of a town where nuclear weapons were the economy, and thus there was very little conversation about the dangers of nuclear weapons. In fact, in my 8th grade class for gifted kids, Norris Bradbury, the second director of the lab, came in and drew a picture of a hydrogen bomb on the board and explained some technical details and never spoke about how those bombs blow up islands. I recently found the brochure from the Bradbury Science Museum where I was in a photo shoot playing with glove boxes as a 10-year-old, and right next to my photo of children playing were models of Fat Man and Little Boy, taking pride in that. When I graduated from high school in 1990, I was awarded the Oppenheimer Memorial Scholarship. And it was only after leaving Los Alamos that I learned that Oppenheimer believed strongly in not proliferating nuclear weapons. And so I stand here today as a voice for the legacy of Oppenheimer. I believe that he would encourage us to stop and ask what we can do to save humanity and life on Earth in this time of climate disruption, rising authoritarianism, and inequality. He would be clear that what this PEIS proposes, creating new nuclear weapons, and that the no action alternative is not really a no action as far as I understand. The no action alternative is to go ahead and create, have a plutonium pit production site in Los Alamos and be making new nuclear weapons. I believe that that these dangers are really unfathomable and unethical in this moment in history. Nuclear weapons mean more possibility for mass destruction, and we already know from what happened at Rocky Flats that there's great danger, great toxicity in producing plutonium pits. And we already know that there are cancer clusters and other illnesses all around Los Alamos. So my appeal, and to those of you serving in our government, is let us stop causing harm before it is too late. And let us be asking what will serve life and well-being on our dearly beloved planet Earth. Thank you.
Stephen Young, and then Gwen Dubois. Dubois? Oh, I thought I had it.
You're too educated.
Hi, my name is Stephen Young, S-T-E-P-H-E-N, last name Young, Y-O-U-N-G. I am the Associate Director of Government Affairs for the Union of Concerned Scientists, Washington, D.C. I have had colleagues at each of the 5 hearings. You've heard from them, I presume. Dr. Dossinger, Dr. Trace Forte, and Dr. Dylan Spalding spoke at 2 hearings since Los Alamos. I'm here keeping the faith. If you have not read it, I would encourage you to really read Dr. Spalding's report on pit production. It is quite lengthy. Summary is quite brief though. If you Google UCS pit production, you'll see his report. It lays out very clearly, for the record, why pit production is not necessary to maintain a nuclear stockpile or to keep the U.S. secure. There's no evidence that pit aging is affecting safety and reliability of the stockpile and won't for many years to come. The evidence suggests that the existing stockpile is not at imminent risk and won't be for decades to come. There are pits, these pits being to be produced will instead be used for newly designed nuclear weapons. As a result, new pit production risks fueling a global arms race that cannot be won. It signals to the world that the US is doubling down on its reliance on nuclear weapons. Production of new weapons in the US is likely to encourage nuclear proliferation elsewhere at a time when tensions are already very high. Moreover, this programmatic environmental impact statement is meant to precede federal actions, not come after the fact. Its analysis is carried out retroactively to rubber stamp a program that is already years in the making and does not allow for consideration of, quote, reasonable alternatives. as required by the National Environmental Policy Act, which stipulates how such analysis should be done. In addition, plutonium pit production is potentially dangerous. The human and environmental risks inherent to plutonium are no different today than in the past. History has shown that nuclear weapons production results in heavy burdens at the sites where it occurs and to the workers who conduct that work. To potentially avoid those burdens and risks, the NSA must consider a true no-action alternative where plutonium pits for new weapons are not produced. The so-called no-action alternative in this PEIS for plutonium pit production involves high levels of pit production. The disconnect between that and a real production alternative which would not include pit production is obvious. That flaw should be corrected. Thank you.
Gwen, please, and then John, is it Brewer?
Brewer.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Before it starts, I just wish I'd brought Dr. Seuss's book, The Butter Battle book. But I didn't bring it, I'm so sorry. My name is Dr. Gwen Du Bois, and I'm representing both Maryland's Chesapeake Physicians for Social Responsibility and the National Physicians for Social Responsibility.
Can you please spell your name for the record so they get it correct?
Okay, last name is D as in David, U, B as in brother, O, I, S as in Samuel. Du Bois, Du girls. Did you know that Nixon almost banned the boys clubs because he thought he was banning the boys clubs? They're all good. All right. First of all, the motto of PSR is we must prevent what we cannot cure. The history of harms to humans and environment from plutonium pits and from plutonium work is a bad history. We know about Rocky Flats, Donald, is how you pronounce it. New Mexico Environment Department issued in February to NSA and DOE to clean up toxic legacy waste of uranium and plutonium still left. And SRS is one of the most polluted sites in the United States, a Superfund site. Contamination at the site includes radioactive isotopes in the sediment, fish, deer, soil, groundwater with risk to the aquifer, Tuscaloosa and Savannah River. There are cases of deaths from leukemia, mesothelioma in male SRS hourly workers. In 2025, there were radioactive wasp nests found on the site. Why is this being done? Claims of legacy plutonium pits too old to function don't hold up. And in 2015, Congress mandated the production of new plutonium pits. But studies by the weapons laboratories are being ignored that have established that stored plutonium pits still have decades of life left, as we've heard. And recommendations to follow up these studies have not been done. Princeton professor Von Hippel said NNSA has not adequately supported or published research on pit aging. It is disingenuous for the agency to invoke undocumented and perhaps unfounded aging claims. The costs are rising without oversight. Cost to refurbish SRS building is now up to $22 billion, says GOA. Protection for workers and communities in this in PEIS are vague and uncertain. The SRS building has never produced plutonium pits before, where oversight may be compromised by pressure to reach unrealistic reduction goals and practically non-functional Defense Nuclear Safety Board. How will a community be protected? Past environmental contamination and harm to communities near both labs have not been remediated. Frontline communities and workers will work in and live in environments amidst long-lived plutonium pollution and other hazards left behind by previous work. Waste at SRS, where will it go? The low-level waste, unlined trenches, risk to groundwater, air, and soil. Where will HLW go if WIP won't accept it or if WIP fills up? How will transportation to and from Pantex be safe with plutonium crossing the country and with waste going to WIP and going past major cities? In medicine, risks must be assessed and compared to benefits. What are the benefits? Not security, not deterrence. Risk to workers and community increased with pressure to put out 50 new plutonium pits at a facility that has never done this before. In a political environment where regulations are disrespected, this is a recipe for disaster. Rush program increases health risks to workers and communities. So I would recommend that we focus back to cleanup that has not, of legacy waste that has not happened adequately at both sites.
like the Iran war, but even so much worse, modernizing is a choice, not a necessity, embarking on dangerous activity without clean reason why and without clarity on unintended consequences that might result in how we are going to handle them, limit plutonium pits to that needed to research and stewardship.
Can you wrap up, please?
Yeah, and we can do this without violating the NPT treaty and most importantly, reducing the existential risk to our lives on this planet. Thank you.
John, please.
My name is John Ruhr, that's R-E-U-W-E-R, and a long-term member of Physicians for Social Responsibility.
I want to make sure that the recording captures it.
R-E-U-W-E-R. So I'm a retired emergency physician who has spent decades looking at the medical and physical effects of nuclear weapons since I was an intern in 1980. At that time, Ronald Reagan came into the presidency with a plan to execute and win a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. I said, I wonder what that looks like, and studied the topic like I would chronic kidney disease or diabetes, and was horrified. And any audience that gave me an hour to explain what I found agreed with me at that time. Hundreds of us at the time spoke out for several years. We changed public opinion, and Ronald Reagan said a nuclear war must never be fought. And the result was a series of treaties that reduced the number of nuclear weapons by 80% from what they were in those days, and nuclear megatonnage by 85%. If you consider that every single plutonium pit, every single weapon is a potential terrorist attack or an accident waiting to happen, that reduction may be the reason we're still here. If one knows the history of nuclear mishaps, including warheads lost, near detonated weapons, false claims of ICBM attacks, it is likely to agree with General Lee Butler, commander of all nuclear forces in the 1990s, and with Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, who I'm guessing knows more about nuclear weapons than all of us in this room combined, came to the same conclusion, that the reason we avoided a nuclear holocaust was luck or divine intervention more than any careful planning. The current generation, however, has been plagued by so many other existential threats like environmental collapse, pandemics, and unbridled artificial intelligence, has largely forgot that nuclear weapons manufacturing the nuclear threat. And weapons manufacturers are happy to take advantage of this lapse and make huge profits at the expense of our future. The National Nuclear Security Administration has an obligation to prevent profiteering, to do what is right for the people of the United States, including honoring our obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as we have heard. And to reiterate other points, even if one believes that nuclear deterrence is still necessary, this peace through atomic strength is something I heard in the 60s and is still batted around contrary to all experience. Then we have heard that the plutonium pits have not been proven to deteriorate past the point of danger. In fact, the Office of Accounting, the government GAO office in a 2024 report says that the pit performance is theoretical and not proven, and that while testing is needed, it identifies new pit production as a mitigation against uncertainties. So mitigation of uncertainties is not sufficient to spend tens or hundreds of billions of dollars to recreate the environmental disasters and harm to thousands of workers that we know will take place if this project moves forward. I call on the NNSA to redirect resources away from further harm of plutonium pit production and into activities that actually protect us from real threats. Thank you.
So that is the 5 people who signed up to speak. What I want to do is a 2-step process here. Is there anybody who has not yet spoken that would like to speak? Just raise your hand, or if there's nobody here who hasn't spoken that wants to speak. Okay. Is there anybody, I know Daryl has one more part to his. Is there anybody else who wants to speak a second time? 1, 2. Daryl, I assume you're, okay. So what I'm gonna ask is anybody, but we know it's 2 people, to please go back to the registration desk, sign up. This is the way they track it. And when everybody has signed up, then I will start calling on them. So I just need you to literally just go behind there and just sign up again. That way that's how they track it. Jay, is that a new sign up or is that? Okay, great. So we have Gwen and then Daryl, and in that order, please. And you each have 3 minutes.
Well, I've scratched out so much, it'll be hard. So the NNSA is supposed to be about safety, security, and reliability. And I believe that the NNSA has strayed from its mission. And there is nothing safe about creating new plutonium pits that aren't necessary. And in fact, safety is negotiating with the other nuclear nations nuclear disarmament, which isn't happening. There are no treaties. What is our future going to be? Is this a war that we're planning? Are we going to win by having more weapons and the latest weapons? What are we going to tell our children and our grandchildren? The NNSA is to assure safety and security and reliability, but that's safety of humanity, as well as our country. And we can't make our country safe and not the rest of the world, because these weapons are omnicidal. So what needs to be done to just maintain safety is what the NNSA has been told to do. That's your mission. Who has the courage to go back to Congress and say, please look at this again? This doesn't make sense. There's no mission for these new plutonium pits, and they're dangerous. And the NNSA is here to help with safety as well as security and reliability. This is a political decision. It's not a decision about safety for this country or humanity. So I beg of you in the NNSA, be true to your mission, be true to this country, be true to humanity, be true to life on this planet. Thank you.
So just for the record, that was Gwen DeBose who spoke in the first round. Next up is Daryl Kimball, and we also have a new sign up that I'll call on after Daryl.
All right, Daryl Kimball, once again, Executive Director of the Arms Control Association. I neglected to say welcome to my local public library here in Washington. I hope you're enjoying it. So to continue with some key points from our evaluation of the PEIS. Second key point is that the PEIS has not considered a genuine no-action alternative, which would include no new production whatsoever. The draft PEIS for the production of plutonium pits analyzes 3 alternatives: no action, a multi-site alternative, and a single-site alternative. Both the multi-site and the single-site alternatives include the scope of no action alternative, which still incorporates several operational changes. The no action alternative incorporates NNSA's prior decision to produce 30 pits a year at Plano, with surge efforts to produce up to 80 pits per year. And at Savannah River, the no action alternative is based on the prior decision to build the Savannah River Plutonium Processing Facility, which the Congress is seriously reevaluating, and internally, the Department of Energy is also reevaluating. So these are not real no-action alternatives, but rather imply at a minimum that, quote, increased pit production will increase the landed workforce, radiological emissions, collective worker dose, waste generation, and radiological transportation. So expanded pit production is just simply not a no-action alternative, and we would assert the need for the PEIS to include a full analysis of a true no-action, no additional pit production alternative. I want to bring up one other issue, especially since our ES&H representative is here, on another related issue which the PEIS does not consider. It fails to take into account the recent elimination of the Environmental Management Advisory Board for nuclear weapons complex sites, a move that the Department of Energy made earlier this year with very little prior notice and no explanation. That happened on February 24. That board has been in existence for 30 years. The mission of the Environmental Management Advisory Board is or was, quote, to provide independent external advice, information, and recommendations to the Assistant Secretary for Environmental Management on corporate issues relating to accelerated site cleanup and risk reduction. And over the years, the EMAB and the site-specific advisory boards have often served a key role in transparency and safety in connection with very sensitive and hazardous weapons complex sites. So how does this relate to this PEIS more specifically? The Environmental Management Advisory Board was established in 1990 as a condition for settling the 1989 lawsuit filed by the Natural Resources Defense Council and 20 other organizations. This is the same lawsuit that forced the DOE to conduct its PEIS process in the 1990s. And among the consequences of the unilateral, and I would say irresponsible, disbanding of the EMAP could be the erosion and the elimination of the subsidiary site-specific advisory boards, including at Hanford, Oak Ridge, Savannah River, Idaho National Engineering Lab, and Northern New Mexico Site-Specific Advisory Board. We need to recall that it was a member of the Rocky Flats Plant Site-Specific Advisory Board, Melinda Casson, who asked questions in 1990 that led to the revelation that there were 66 pounds of plutonium in the ductwork at Rocky Flats that could have led to a fire or a criticality event and helped lead to the closure of that bomb-making facility by 1992. So this is not covered whatsoever in this PEIS because it's a recent event, and I think the Department of Energy needs to reevaluate based upon the effects of that elimination on the many safety and security issues relating to this proposed expansion of pit production.
Next up is, and I can't quite read the name, it's Vincent Inton?
Oh, just keep going. Tandy.
Inton? Oh,
There you go.
Intondi. I apologize. If you could, when you introduce yourself, spell the last
Yeah, no
name
worries.
particularly. Thank you.
Thank you. Vincent Intondi, I-N-T-O-N-D-I, and I'm here representing Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. Full disclosure, I wasn't going to speak here today, but then I heard everything going on and kind of felt compelled to. And I'm coming to you today, not just as an executive director for Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, but as a historian who has written and researched about the Savannah River site for over 20 years. Coon areas. Those are the names of the segregated places for all the black workers at the Savannah River project. There was no protection for any of the black workers who were filled with tumors and cancer because they got the lowest paying, dirtiest jobs at the Savannah River site. There was no compensation for the black sharecroppers that were working for the white farmers when they were all booted off their land to create the Savannah River site. So I just want you to think about what your legacy is going to be. That right now we're talking about billions of dollars being spent on something when most people don't have food to eat. When we're going to spend billions of dollars and create more nuclear weapons at a place that has a historical legacy of institutional racism and the death of African Americans and people of color, to make weapons that will then be either used, threatened to be used, or tested on, once again, people of color. So we can sit here and talk about the technical aspects, which other speakers have covered so well today. We could talk about what's in Congress or what's already been appropriated. But at the end of the day, as an individual, I would ask you three. What do you ultimately want your legacy to be? Is it working, and is it promoting, and is it funding a place this evil as the Savannah River Project? Thank you.
Is there anybody who has yet to speak who would like to speak? Okay. So here's how it's gonna work. We're gonna have the meeting in recess. The meeting is advertised until 5 p.m. We will be here until 5 p.m. So the meeting is in recess. Everybody is free to go. But if you'd like to look at the posters, we're gonna reopen the poster session there. Maybe some people have said something that has triggered a question. So we will reopen the poster session and people will be here until 5 p.m. So we are in recess. It's 3:31.